You should leave her behind." The words cut through the cold mountain air like a blade, and Nora felt her heart sink even though she had expected them. Beta Marcus stood near the fire, his arms crossed over his broad chest, his eyes fixed on Alpha Caden with an expression that mixed concern with barely concealed disdain as he glanced briefly in her direction. "She will slow us down. She has no wolf. She cannot defend herself. If the rumors about rogue packs in these mountains are true, she will be nothing but a liability." Nora kept her head down, focusing on the task of sorting through the dried meat supplies, as if she had not heard every word, as if each syllable did not confirm what she had always known about her place in the Shadow Moon Pack. She was the Omega without a wolf, the girl who existed on the edges of pack life, useful only for menial tasks that no one else wanted to do. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped the meat in cloth, but she forced herself to remain still, to remain invisible, because that was what had kept her alive for 22 years. Caden Blackthorn did not respond immediately. The Alpha King stood with his back to the fire, his silhouette massive against the darkening sky, his presence so commanding that even the Beta who had known him since childhood seemed to shrink slightly under his gaze. When Caden finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled, carrying the weight of absolute authority that came from ruling the 5 kingdoms for the past decade. "She comes with us. The decision has been made." There was no room for argument in those words, no invitation for further discussion, and Marcus wisely fell silent even though his jaw tightened with obvious disagreement. Nora risked a glance upward, her eyes meeting Caden's for just a fraction of a second before she looked away, her pulse racing. She did not understand why the Alpha King had insisted she accompany this hunting expedition into the Forbidden Lands. She did not understand why he had specifically requested her presence when there were dozens of stronger, more capable wolves who could have filled her role. All she knew was that when the Alpha King gave an order, you obeyed, even if that order made no sense. The expedition had been traveling for 3 days, moving deeper into the mountain range that marked the border between the civilized territories and the wildlands where no pack had claimed dominion for centuries. The official purpose was to hunt the great elk that migrated through these mountains each autumn, a tradition that allowed the Alpha King to demonstrate his strength and provide meat for the upcoming winter. But Nora had noticed the way Caden studied the landscape, the way his eyes scanned the tree line with an intensity that suggested he was searching for something more than game. She had noticed the ancient maps he pored over each night, maps that showed landmarks and territories that no longer existed, that had been lost to time and legend. Something else had brought them here, something that had nothing to do with hunting elk, but Nora knew better than to ask questions. Omegas without wolves did not question Alpha Kings. The rest of the hunting party consisted of 12 wolves, all of them seasoned warriors who had fought in the territorial wars that had raged before Caden had united the 5 kingdoms under his rule. They moved through the forest with practiced efficiency, their wolves just beneath the surface, ready to emerge at the first sign of danger. Nora was the only one who traveled on 2 legs always, the only one whose wolf had never awakened, whose transformation had never come, despite years of waiting and hoping and praying to the moon goddess for a miracle that never arrived. She carried supplies and prepared meals and tended to equipment, making herself useful in the only ways she could, trying desperately not to be the burden that everyone clearly believed she was. Lady Vivian Ashford, Caden's intended queen, had remained at the palace, but her influence hung over the expedition like a shadow. Before they had departed, Vivian had made her opinions about Nora's inclusion abundantly clear, her beautiful face twisted with disgust as she had pulled Caden aside for a private conversation that Nora had not been meant to overhear. "Bringing that wolfless girl is beneath you. What message does it send to the other packs? That the great Alpha King needs an Omega to carry his supplies?" Caden had not responded to Vivian's complaints, had simply walked away with that infuriating calm that made it impossible to know what he was thinking. But Nora had seen the flash of anger in Vivian's eyes, had recognized the promise of retribution that would come later. Night fell quickly in the mountains, the temperature dropping until frost formed on the edges of their supplies, and their breath came out in visible clouds. They had made camp in a small clearing surrounded by dense pine trees, the kind of natural shelter that provided some protection from the wind, while offering multiple escape routes if needed. The fire crackled in the center of the camp, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the warriors as they ate their evening meal and shared stories of past hunts. Nora sat apart from the group, as always, eating her portion quickly and quietly, trying not to draw attention to herself. She could feel their eyes on her occasionally, could sense their resentment at her presence, their confusion about why the Alpha King had brought someone so useless on such an important expedition. She had learned long ago not to expect friendship or acceptance from pack members. She had learned to be grateful for indifference and to fear anything more. The wind is changing. One of the scouts, a grizzled warrior named Thomas, stood at the edge of the clearing, his nose lifted to the air, his expression troubled. There is something out there. Something watching us. The casual conversation around the fire died immediately, every warrior suddenly alert, their bodies tensing as their wolves rose closer to the surface. Caden was on his feet in an instant, moving to stand beside Thomas, his own senses extending outward to probe the darkness beyond their firelight. Nora felt her stomach clench with fear. She had no wolf to warn her of danger, no heightened senses to detect threats, no way to protect herself if something attacked. She was helpless, in a way that the others could never truly understand, vulnerable in a manner that went beyond simple weakness. "How many?" Caden asked, his voice barely above a whisper, his eyes scanning the tree line with predatory focus. "I cannot tell." Thomas shook his head, frustration evident in his posture. "The scent is strange, wild, not rogue wolves, but not exactly normal either. And there are many of them. Too many." The fire suddenly seemed very small, the clearing very exposed. Marcus moved to stand on Caden's other side, his hand resting on the hilt of the silver blade at his waist. "Should we shift? Prepare for battle?" But before Caden could respond, the first howl split the night, a sound so primal and hungry that it made Nora's blood run cold. It was answered immediately by another howl, and then another, the sounds coming from all directions, surrounding their camp in a circle of predatory intent. These were not the controlled communicative howls of pack wolves. These were the sounds of wild creatures, of animals driven by hunger and instinct, of beasts that had forgotten what it meant to be civilized. The warriors began to shift, their bodies flowing into their wolf forms with practiced ease, creating a defensive perimeter around the fire. But Caden remained in his human form, his attention fixed on the darkness, his body vibrating with tension. "Stay near the fire," he commanded. And though he did not look at her, Nora knew the order was directed at her. She pressed herself closer to the flames, her heart hammering against her ribs, her hands shaking uncontrollably now. She had never felt so utterly useless, so completely at the mercy of forces she could not fight or flee from. The wolves emerged from the tree line like ghosts, their eyes reflecting the firelight in dozens of points of amber and green. They were massive, larger than any pack wolves Nora had ever seen, their fur matted and wild, their bodies lean with hunger. There had to be at least 30 of them, maybe more, moving with a coordination that suggested intelligence despite their feral appearance. The Shadow Moon warriors growled and snapped, holding their defensive positions, but Nora could sense their uncertainty. They were outnumbered, and these wild wolves showed no fear, no hesitation, no recognition of the Alpha King's authority. This was their territory, and the hunting party had intruded. The lead wild wolf, a massive gray creature with scars crisscrossing its muzzle, stepped forward, its lips pulled back to reveal teeth that looked capable of crushing bone. It fixed its gaze on the defensive line, calculating, assessing. preparing to attack. The tension stretched like a wire pulled too tight, everyone waiting for the first move, the first drop of blood that would trigger the inevitable violence. And then the wind shifted again, blowing from the fire toward the wild wolves, carrying the sense of the camp outward. And something impossible happened. The gray wolf's head snapped around, its attention suddenly focused not on the warriors, but on Nora, still huddled near the fire. Its ears pricked forward, its aggressive posture melting into something that looked almost like confusion. It took a step toward her, then another, ignoring the snarling warriors completely, and Nora felt a scream building in her throat. But the scream never came. Instead, the gray wolf lowered its massive head, its ears flattening against its skull in a gesture of submission that made no sense. Behind it, the other wild wolves were doing the same, their aggressive stances dissolving into postures of deference, their attention all focused on her, with an intensity that was terrifying and inexplicable in equal measure. "What in the name of the moon goddess?" Marcus breathed, his wolf form shifting back to human in his shock, his eyes wide with disbelief. The wild wolves were not attacking. They were not even threatening. They were arranging themselves in a protective circle. Around the camp, their bodies turned outward to face the darkness beyond, their posture clearly defensive. They were protecting the camp. No, Nora realized with a jolt of pure terror and confusion. They were protecting her. Caden shifted back to his human form, his movements slow and deliberate, his eyes fixed on the scene before him with an expression that Nora had never seen on his face before. Wonder, recognition, understanding. He moved toward her with careful steps, ignoring the wild wolves. Entirely, as if he knew instinctively that they would not harm him as long as he approached her. When he reached her side, he knelt down so that his eyes were level with hers, and Nora found herself staring into the gold and amber depths of the Alpha King's gaze, unable to look away, unable to breathe. "Who are you?" Caden asked, his voice soft but commanding, demanding truth. "What are you?" Nora shook her head, tears streaming down her face now, her whole body trembling. "I do not know. I am nobody. I am just Nora. I am just the wolfless Omega. I do not understand what is happening." But even as she spoke the words, something deep inside her chest was awakening. Something that had been sleeping for her entire life. Something that recognized the wild wolves as kin, as family, as hers. The gray wolf moved closer, its massive head lowering until it rested against her knee, and Nora felt a connection snap into place, felt a bond form that was older than pack law, older than civilization, older than the kingdoms themselves. "You are not wolfless," Caden said, his hand reaching out to cup her face, his touch gentle despite the strength she knew he possessed. "You have never been wolfless. Your wolf has been sleeping, waiting, because what lives inside you is too powerful to awaken without purpose." His thumb brushed away her tears, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her feel naked and exposed. "These are not ordinary wild wolves. They are the ancient ones, the first wolves, the ones who lived before packs were formed, before territories were claimed. They have not been seen in centuries. They answer to no alpha, bow to no king." He paused, his next words coming out rough and filled with something that sounded like awe. "They answer only to their true queen, the one who carries the bloodline of the first shifters, the one who was promised in prophecy." Nora could not process his words, could not make sense of what he was saying. She was nobody. She had always been nobody. But the wild wolves pressed closer, their presence a physical confirmation of Caden's impossible claims, and she felt the thing inside her chest unfurl further, felt power she had never known existed begin to course through her veins like liquid fire. If you are enjoying this story, do not forget to leave a like and and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one. The night around them seemed to hold its breath, the very forest waiting to see what would happen next. Behind Caden, the Shadow Moon warriors had shifted back to human form, their faces showing varying degrees of shock and confusion and fear. Marcus looked like someone had struck him across the face, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Thomas had actually taken a step backward, his hand raised in an instinctive gesture of submission. They understood what they were witnessing, even if Nora did not. They understood that everything they had believed about the Wolfless, Omega, was a lie, that the girl they had dismissed and pitied and resented was something far more than any of them had imagined. The gray wolf lifted its head from Nora's knee and turned to face Caden, and for a moment, Nora thought she saw challenge in its eyes, a question, a test. But then the wolf dipped its head in acknowledgement, in acceptance, as if recognizing Caden's right to be near her, as if granting permission for his presence. The other wolves followed suit, their collective submission creating a wave of movement through the circle, and Nora felt something shift in the air, felt the weight of destiny settling onto her shoulders like a mantle she had never asked to wear. "We need to get her back to the palace," Marcus said, finding his voice at last, though it came out shaky and uncertain. "If what you say is true, if she is who you think she is, then she is in danger. Lady Vivian will not accept this. The other packs will not accept this. There are laws, traditions, bloodlines that have been established for centuries. You cannot just—" But Caden cut him off with a single raised hand, his attention never leaving Nora's face. "The Ancient Ones have chosen. The bloodline has awakened. There is no law, no tradition, no political alliance that supersedes this. Do you understand me, Marcus? Nothing supersedes this." His words carried the weight of absolute authority, but there was something else in his voice too, something that sounded almost like relief, like he had been searching for something his entire life and had finally found it. "She goes nowhere without my protection. She stays at my side from this moment forward. Anyone who tries to harm her will answer to me personally." The promise in those words was dark and deadly, and Nora saw Marcus pale slightly before nodding his acceptance. The wild wolves maintained their protective circle through the night, their presence both comforting and terrifying. Nora could feel them in a way she had never felt anything before, could sense their thoughts and emotions and instincts through a connection that defied explanation. They were hungry, yes, but they were also devoted, bound to her by something that went beyond loyalty or pack bonds. They existed to protect her, to serve her, because she was what they had been waiting for through countless generations. The knowledge should have felt empowering, but instead it just made Nora feel overwhelmed and lost. She did not know how to be whatever it was that Caden believed her to be. She did not know how to be a queen to Ancient Ones, did not know how to wield power she had never trained to control. All she knew was how to survive, how to be invisible, how to avoid drawing attention that might get her hurt or killed. Everything else was foreign territory, a landscape she had no map to navigate. Caden remained beside her throughout the night, his presence a solid anchor in a world that had suddenly become unrecognizable. He did not touch her again after that first moment, but she was acutely aware of his proximity, of the heat radiating from his body, of the way his eyes tracked her every movement, as if he was afraid she might disappear if he looked away. Around them, the Shadow Moon warriors tried to settle into uneasy rest, but Nora could see them casting glances in her direction, could see the fear and uncertainty in their faces. She had gone from being beneath their notice to being something they did not know how to categorize, something that threatened the established order of their world. Marcus approached the fire several times, clearly wanting to speak with Caden, but each time the Alpha King's expression made it clear that the conversation would not be welcome. This was not the time for politics or planning or debate. This was the time for Nora to simply exist, to breathe, to process the impossible truth that had been revealed in a single night. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, the wild wolves stirred, their collective attention turning toward the forest. The gray wolf moved to stand before Nora once more, its intelligent eyes meeting hers, and she felt a message pass between them, clear as spoken words. They would go now, but they would return when she called. They would always return. They were hers, bound to her by blood and destiny, an ancient magic that predated everything the modern packs understood about themselves. The gray wolf lowered its head one final time, a gesture that was part bow and part affection, and then it turned and melted back into the forest, the other wolves following in a graceful stream of movement until they were gone, leaving only the evidence of their presence in the trampled earth around the camp. The Shadow Moon warriors released collective breaths they had not realized they were holding, the tension draining from their bodies now that the immediate supernatural threat had passed. But the unease remained, the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again, hanging over them like a storm cloud. "We break camp immediately," Caden announced, his voice cutting through the morning air with command. "We return to the palace today. No stops, no delays." He turned to look at each of his warriors in turn, his gaze holding them with the force of an alpha's will. "What happened here last night does not get discussed until we are behind secure walls. Is that understood?" There were nods of agreement, quick and emphatic, because no one wanted to be the one to disobey the Alpha King, especially not after witnessing what they had witnessed. As the warriors began to pack up the camp with efficient haste, Caden finally turned his full attention to Nora, and she felt the impact of his focus like a physical touch. "Can you ride?" he asked. And when she nodded, he continued, "You will ride with me. I want you close where I can protect you." It was not a request, and Nora did not treat it as one. She simply nodded again, her voice still trapped somewhere in her throat, her mind still reeling from everything that had happened. The journey back to the palace took less than 2 days of hard riding, the party pushing their horses to the limit, stopping only when absolutely necessary for rest. Nora rode in front of Caden on his massive black stallion, his arms on either side of her as he controlled the reins, his body a wall of warmth and strength at her back. She tried not to think about how aware she was of him, how every brush of his chest against her shoulders sent sparks of electricity through her body, how his scent surrounded her in a way that made her wolf, that sleeping thing inside her, stir with interest and recognition. She tried not to think about the fact that this was the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the 5 kingdoms, the male who was promised to Lady Vivian Ashford in a political alliance that had taken years to negotiate. She tried not to think about how impossibly complicated her life had become in the space of a single night. But it was impossible to ignore the connection she felt to him. Impossible to deny that something had shifted between them in those moments when he had knelt beside her and looked at her like she was something precious and rare. They arrived at the palace gates, just as the sun was setting on the second day, the massive stone fortress rising against the darkening sky like a monument to power and permanence. Guards rushed to meet them, their faces showing surprise at the expedition's early return, their eyes widening when they saw Nora riding with the Alpha King himself. News would spread through the palace like wildfire, Nora knew. Speculation and gossip would run rampant, and Lady Vivian would hear about it within minutes of their arrival. The thought made Nora's stomach twist with anxiety, because she had seen firsthand what happened to wolves who threatened Vivian's position, had witnessed the subtle and not-so-subtle ways the future Queen dealt with anyone she perceived as competition. Caden helped her down from the horse with careful hands, his touch lingering longer than necessary, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Go to your quarters," he said quietly, his voice for her ears only. "Stay there until I send for you. Do not open the door for anyone except me or Marcus. Do you understand?" The concern in his voice was clear, the underlying threat of danger unmistakable. And Nora nodded. Quickly, I understand. But as she turned to hurry toward the servants' wing where her small room was located, a cold voice stopped her in her tracks. How touching. The Alpha King playing nursemaid to the wolfless Omega. I am sure the other packs will find this absolutely fascinating. Lady Vivian Ashford stood at the top of the palace steps, her statuesque figure draped in a gown of deep crimson that matched the anger burning in her green eyes. She was beautiful in the way a blade was. Beautiful, all sharp edges and dangerous curves, her blonde hair arranged in intricate braids that must have taken hours to achieve, her makeup flawless despite the late hour. She descended the steps with graceful precision, her gaze fixed on Nora with barely concealed hatred. I must say, I did not expect you to return early, my king. Did the hunting not go well? Or were you too distracted by your new little pet to focus on your actual responsibilities? The insult was clear. The disrespect evident, but Vivian delivered it with a smile that never reached her eyes, with a tone that could almost be mistaken for playful teasing if one ignored the venom beneath. Caden's entire body went rigid, his face transforming into a mask of cold fury that made even Vivian pause in her approach. You will watch your tone, Lady Ashford. You may be my intended, but that does not give you the right to speak to me or about my decisions with disrespect. His voice was quiet, deadly quiet, the kind of quiet that preceded violence. And you will never, ever refer to Nora in such a manner again. Do I make myself clear? For a moment, genuine fear flashed across Vivian's face, her mask of confidence cracking to reveal the calculation beneath. But she recovered quickly, lowering her eyes in a gesture of submission that Nora suspected was entirely false. Of course, my king. I spoke out of turn. I was simply concerned. Bringing a wolfless girl on such a dangerous expedition seemed unusual. I was worried for your safety. The lie was smooth, practiced, but Nora could see the fury still burning in Vivian's eyes when she glanced up briefly, could see the promise of retribution directed squarely at her. This was not over. This would never be over as long as Vivian saw her as a threat. Your concern is noted, Caden said, his tone making it clear the conversation was finished. But unnecessary. Now if you will excuse me, I have matters to attend to. He moved past Vivian without another word, his hand briefly touching Nora's back in a gesture that was both protective and possessive, guiding her toward the palace entrance. But as they passed, Nora heard Vivian's whisper, so quiet it was barely audible, clearly meant only for her ears. Enjoy this while it lasts, little Omega. The Alpha King may be intrigued by whatever trick you have managed to pull, but when he learns the truth about what you really are, when he understands what keeping you alive will cost him, he will throw you away like the worthless creature you have always been. And I will be there to watch you fall. The words sent ice through Nora's veins, but she kept walking, kept her head down, because responding to Vivian's threats would only make things worse. She had survived this long by knowing when to be invisible, when to endure in silence. She would survive this too somehow, even if she had no idea how. What do you think will happen next? Leave your predictions in the comments below. The palace corridors were a maze of stone and shadow, lit by torches that cast dancing light across walls decorated with tapestries depicting the history of the 5 kingdoms. Nora had worked in this palace for 3 years, but always in the background, always in the spaces where servants belonged. She had never walked these main corridors before, had never been escorted by the Alpha King himself, had never felt the weight of guards' stares as they watched her pass with expressions of confusion and curiosity. Caden did not take her to the servants' quarters as she had expected. Instead, he led her deeper into the palace, toward the residential wing where the high-ranking pack members lived, where she had absolutely no business being. When he finally stopped in front of a heavy wooden door, Nora looked at him with wide eyes, shaking her head. I cannot stay here. This is not appropriate. People will talk. Lady Vivian will. but Caden cut her off by opening the door and gently pushing her inside, following her in and closing the door behind them with a firm click that sounded very final. The room was beautiful, far more luxurious than anything Nora had ever experienced. A large 4-poster bed dominated one wall, covered in thick furs and soft linens. A fireplace crackled with warmth, driving away the mountain chill that still clung to her clothes. Windows looked out over the palace gardens, now shadowed in the evening light, but still visible in their manicured beauty. There was a sitting area with comfortable chairs, a writing desk, a wardrobe that probably cost more than Nora had earned in her entire life. This was not a servant's room. This was a room for someone important, someone valued, someone who mattered. "I cannot stay here," Nora repeated, her voice barely above a whisper, her hands twisting together nervously. "This is too much. I am not meant for places like this." Caden closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, his hands coming up to frame her face, forcing her to look at him, forcing her to see the intensity burning in his gold and amber eyes. "You are meant for far more than this," he said, his voice rough with emotion she could not quite name. "You are meant for everything. Do you understand me, Nora? Everything." The way he said her name, like it was something precious, something worth savoring, made her heart skip erratically in her chest. She wanted to believe him, wanted to accept the impossible things he was saying, but a lifetime of being told she was worthless could not be erased in a single moment, could not be overwritten by pretty words and kind gestures. "I am nobody," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I have always been nobody. I do not understand why any of this is happening. I do not understand what you want from me." Caden's thumbs stroked across her cheekbones, wiping away tears she had not realized were falling. His touch so gentle it made her chest ache. "I want you to be safe. I want you to understand what you are, what you have always been. I want time to figure out what it means that the Ancient Ones have chosen you. That prophecy has brought us to this moment. But most of all," he paused, his eyes searching hers, and when he continued, his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Most of all, I want to understand this pull I feel toward you, this recognition, this sense that I have been searching for you my entire life, without even knowing it." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implications and impossibilities. Nora knew she should pull away, should put distance between herself and the Alpha King who was promised to another, who represented everything she could never have. But her body would not obey, her heart would not listen to reason, and when Caden lowered his head slowly, giving her time to refuse, time to step back, she found herself lifting onto her toes instead, found herself meeting him halfway. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if Caden was afraid she might shatter under too much pressure. His lips were warm against hers, soft despite the hardness of the warrior she knew him to be, and Nora felt something inside her chest explode into light and warmth and rightness. This was what the mate bond felt like, she realized with stunning clarity. This was what it meant to find your other half, your perfect match, the one the moon goddess had created specifically for you. It was not possible. It should not be possible. Alpha Kings did not have wolfless Omegas as mates. Destiny did not work that way. But the bond between them was undeniable, growing stronger with every second their lips remained connected, weaving them together in ways that would be impossible to undo. When Caden finally pulled back, his breathing was ragged, his control clearly hanging by a thread. "This complicates everything," he said. But there was no regret in his voice, only acknowledgement of reality. "Vivian will fight this. The Council will fight this. Every pack that has daughters they hope to marry to me will fight this. They will say you have used dark magic to enchant me, that you have manipulated me somehow, that you are not worthy of being queen." He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, his next words so quiet she almost missed them. They will try to kill you, Nora. They will see you as a threat to the established order, to political alliances that have taken decades to build. And I will have to protect you from all of them while simultaneously trying to uncover the truth about your bloodline, about why the Ancient Ones recognize you as their queen. The weight of what he was saying pressed down on Nora's shoulders, the danger suddenly feeling very real and immediate. She had escaped notice for so long by being invisible, by being insignificant. Now she was about to become the most visible, most controversial figure in the Five Kingdoms, and she had no idea how to survive that kind of attention. Maybe we should keep this secret, Nora suggested, her practical side reasserting itself despite the lingering warmth from their kiss. Maybe I should go back to the servants' quarters, pretend nothing has changed, and you can marry Vivian as planned. We can figure out the Ancient Ones thing separately, quietly, without drawing more attention. It would be safer for everyone. But even as she spoke the words, she knew Caden would never agree. She could see the refusal forming in his eyes, could feel the possessiveness radiating from him in waves that made her wolf, that sleeping power inside her, rumble with approval. No, Caden said, his voice leaving no room for argument. I will not hide you. I will not pretend you are nothing to me. Whatever consequences come, we will face them together. That is my decision, as your king and as your mate. The casual way he used that word, mate, as if it was already an established fact, rather than an impossible complication, made Nora's breath catch. But before she could formulate a response, a sharp knock on the door interrupted them, followed by Marcus's urgent voice from the corridor. My king, I apologize for the interruption, but we have a situation. The council has convened an emergency meeting. Lady Vivian has made accusations. Your presence is required immediately. Caden's jaw clenched with frustration, but he stepped back from Nora, his expression shifting into the mask of authority he wore when dealing with political matters. Stay here, he commanded, moving toward the door. Lock it behind me. Do not let anyone in except Marcus or myself. There is food in the cabinet by the window, water in the pitcher by the bed. I will return as soon as I can. He paused with his hand on the door handle, looking back at her with an intensity that made her tremble. Do not doubt this, Nora. Do not doubt us. Whatever happens in that council chamber, whatever accusations Vivian makes, whatever threats the council delivers, nothing will change what I know to be true. You are mine, and I am yours. Everything else is just details we will work through. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a solid thunk that left Nora alone in the beautiful room, her mind spinning with everything that had happened, her body still tingling from their kiss, her heart torn between hope and terror in equal measure. She moved to the window, looking out over the palace grounds, and wondered what accusations Vivian had made, what weapons the future queen had already deployed in her campaign to eliminate the threat Nora represented. The moon was rising, nearly full, its silver light spilling across the gardens and illuminating the forest beyond the palace walls. Somewhere out there, the Ancient Ones were waiting, watching, ready to protect her if she called. The knowledge should have been comforting, but instead it just made Nora feel more alone, because power she did not understand and could not. Control was not really power at all. It was just another burden, another complication, another reason for people to fear and resent her. She pressed her hand against the cool glass of the window and tried to remember what it had felt like to be invisible, to be insignificant, to be safe in her insignificance. But that life was gone now, burned away in the light of ancient recognition and destined bonds. There was no going back. There was only forward, into a future that terrified her more than she could express, but that also called to something deep inside her, to the power that was finally beginning to wake after a lifetime of sleep. The council chamber was a circular room at the heart of the palace, its walls lined with the banners of the 5 kingdoms, its center dominated by a massive round table, where the most powerful alphas and pack representatives gathered to advise the king. Caden entered to find the room already full, the air thick with tension, and barely suppressed. Hostility. Vivian sat in a position of prominence, her face a perfect mask of wounded dignity, her eyes red as if she had been crying, though Caden detected no genuine tears. The council members regarded him with expressions ranging from concern to disapproval to outright anger, and Caden knew immediately that Vivian had been busy in the short time since their return, planting seeds of doubt and discord with strategic precision. My king, Lord Aldrich, the eldest council member and former Alpha of the Northern Territory, spoke first, his voice grave. We have heard disturbing reports from your hunting expedition. Reports of wild wolves surrounding your camp, of you bringing the wolfless Omega girl to your own quarters, of you claiming she has some sort of special significance. Lady Vivian has expressed concern that you may be under the influence of dark magic or manipulation. We must address these concerns immediately. Caden remained standing, refusing to take his seat at the table, his posture radiating the authority of an alpha king who would not be questioned by subordinates, regardless of their titles or positions. What you have heard are facts, not reports. The Ancient Ones did surround our camp. They did recognize Nora as significant, and I have indeed placed her under my personal protection, because she has been revealed to carry a bloodline we believed extinct. He paused, his eyes moving from one council member to the next, holding each gaze until they looked away. What Lady Vivian has not mentioned, I am sure, is that she has no say in who I choose to protect or how I choose to investigate matters of ancient prophecy. Her concern is noted and dismissed. The bluntness of his words caused several council members to flinch, and Vivian's carefully maintained expression cracked slightly, rage flashing across her features before she controlled it. You speak of ancient prophecy, but what proof do you have? Another council member, Lady Helena, from the Eastern Pack, leaned forward with obvious skepticism. The wolfless Omega has lived among us for years without showing any sign of power or significance. Now suddenly, after one expedition into the mountains, you claim she is something special? It seems far more likely that she has somehow deceived you, perhaps with the help of a witch or dark practitioner. If you want to see how this story ends, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. The accusation hung in the air. Dangerous and damning, and Caden felt his wolf rise to the surface, his eyes bleeding to gold with barely controlled rage. You dare suggest I am so weak-minded that I can be deceived by simple magic? You dare question my judgment and my authority? His voice dropped to a dangerous growl that made even the bravest council members pale. I am Alpha King of the 5 Kingdoms. I have led you through wars and unified territories that had fought for centuries. I have earned your respect and your trust. And yet you sit here, listening to the poison whispered by a woman who sees her political position threatened. And you question me? The power in his words rolled through the chamber like thunder, and several wolves instinctively lowered their heads in submission. But Lord Aldrich, to his credit, held his ground. We do not question your strength or your leadership, my king. We question whether you have considered the full implications of what you are doing. Your betrothal to Lady Vivian has secured peace with the Western Territories. Breaking that engagement would risk renewed conflict, would destabilize alliances that have kept the kingdoms united. And for what? For a girl with no wolf, no proven heritage, no preparation for leadership? Can you truly ask us to risk everything we have built for that? The question was fair, Caden had to admit, even if he hated it. The council was right to be concerned about political stability, right to question decisions that could have far-reaching consequences for all the packs. But they did not understand what he had witnessed. did not comprehend the significance of the Ancient One's appearance, did not recognize the weight of prophecy unfolding before their eyes. "I am not asking you to risk anything," Caden said, his voice calmer now but no less authoritative. "I am telling you what will be. Nora carries the bloodline of the first shifters. The Ancient Ones have recognized her as their queen. These are facts, not theories or wishes. Whether you believe it or not, whether you approve or not, does not change reality." He moved to the table now, planting his hands on its surface and leaning forward to look each council member in the eye. "I will uncover the full truth of her heritage. I will protect her while that investigation takes place. And when the time comes, I will make decisions about betrothals and alliances based on all available information, not on political convenience or personal preference. Until then, you will treat Nora with the respect due to someone under my personal protection. Anyone who threatens her, undermines her, or attempts to harm her in any way will face my direct displeasure. Is that understood?" Vivienne rose from her seat, her composure finally shattering completely, her beautiful face contorted with fury and hurt that might actually be partially genuine. "You would cast me aside for her? After everything my family has done for you, after the years I have spent preparing to be your queen, after the sacrifices I have made to secure peace between our territories?" Her voice rose with each word, losing its careful control. "She is nothing, Caden. Nothing. A wolfless omega with delusions of grandeur. And you are throwing away everything for her, risking war, risking the stability of the kingdoms, risking your own reputation. For what? For some prophecy you think you saw? For ancient wolves that might have been nothing more than a starving pack acting unusually?" She moved, around the table toward him, her hands reaching out in supplication. "Please, my king, see reason. Send the girl away. Let me help you understand that whatever you think you witnessed was not destiny, but coincidence. We can still salvage this. We can still have the future we plan together." For a moment, Caden almost felt sorry for her. Vivienne had indeed spent years preparing to be queen, had played the political game with skill and patience, had every right to expect the marriage that had been promised. But feeling sorry for her did not change the fundamental truth that had been revealed in the mountains, did not alter the mate bond he felt toward Nora, did not make Vivienne anything other than a strategic alliance he had agreed to before he knew his true mate existed. "I am sorry, Vivienne," he said quietly, and he meant it. "I am sorry that circumstances have changed. I am sorry that what we planned can no longer be. But I cannot deny what I know to be true. I cannot reject my mate for political convenience. Surely you, of all people, understand that. Surely you remember the stories of your own parents, how they found each other against all odds, how nothing could keep them apart once the mate bond formed." He stepped back from her reaching hands, creating distance that was both physical and metaphorical. "I will not humiliate you publicly. We will find a way to dissolve our betrothal that honors your family's contribution to peace. But I will not marry you, Vivienne. That future is over." The slap came so fast that even Caden's enhanced reflexes almost failed to react. Vivienne's hand connected with his face with a crack that echoed through the chamber, her eyes blazing with hatred that was no longer concealed behind any mask of civility. "You will regret this," she hissed, her voice venomous. "You will regret choosing that worthless omega over me. I will make sure of it. If you will not be mine, then you will watch everything you care about crumble to dust." Starting with her. The threat was clear, unmistakable, and Caden felt his wolf surge forward with the urge to respond to the challenge, to put Vivienne in her place with force. But he controlled himself. Barely, because attacking her would only prove the council's concerns about his judgment, would give them ammunition to question his decisions. Instead, he turned to Marcus, who had been standing silently by the door throughout the entire confrontation. "Escort Lady Vivienne to her quarters. She is confined there until further notice, with guards to ensure she does not leave without my express permission. She is to have no visitors, no correspondence sent or received, no communication with anyone outside her immediate household staff. The order was harsh, effectively placing Vivian under house arrest, and her face went white with shock and rage. "You cannot do this," she sputtered, looking around the council chamber for support. "You cannot imprison me for speaking the truth, for trying to protect you from your own poor judgment." But no one came to her defense. The council members looked uncomfortable, clearly disturbed by how quickly the situation had deteriorated, but unwilling to directly defy their king's command. Lady Helena actually looked relieved, as if Vivian's confinement would prevent further escalation. Lord Aldrich shook his head slowly, disappointment clear in his weathered features, but he made no move to intervene. Marcus moved to Vivian's side, his expression carefully neutral, his hand gentle but firm as he took her arm. "Come, my lady. Do not make this harder than it needs to be." For a moment, it looked like Vivian might resist, might make a scene that would further damage her position. But then her shoulders straightened, her chin lifted with regal dignity, and she allowed Marcus to lead her from the chamber without further protest. Only at the doorway did she pause, looking back at Caden with eyes that promised vengeance and pain. "She will destroy you," Vivian said, her voice cold and certain. "Mark my words, Caden Blackthorn. The wolfless Omega will be your downfall, and I will be there to pick up the pieces when you finally understand what you have thrown away." Then she was gone, and Caden was left alone with the council, with the weight of his decisions pressing down on his shoulders like physical burdens. The silence that followed Vivian's departure was heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, Lord Aldrich spoke, his voice weary. "We will support you in this, my king, because we have pledged our loyalty to you and your leadership. But I hope you understand what you have set in motion. The Western Territories will not take the broken betrothal lightly. Other pacts who had hoped to form alliances through marriage will see this as proof that you are unpredictable, that agreements with you cannot be trusted. And if this girl truly is what you believe her to be, if she truly carries the bloodline of the first shifters, then there are forces far older and darker than political intrigue that will take notice. Forces that have not stirred in centuries, that have allowed the modern pacts to exist only because we stayed beneath their attention." The warning sent a chill through Caden, because he knew Aldrich was right. By bringing Nora into the light, by claiming her as his mate and investigating her heritage, he was potentially awakening things that were better left sleeping. But the alternative was to reject his mate, to ignore destiny, to let fear dictate his actions, and that was something Caden had never done and would not start now. "Then we will face whatever comes," he said simply. "Together, as we always have. Prepare the pack for potential conflict. Reach out to our allies. Reassure them that the 5 kingdoms remain strong and united under my leadership. And most importantly, begin researching everything we have in the archives about the first shifters, the ancient ones, and the prophecies surrounding the return of their bloodline. I want answers, and I want them quickly." The council members nodded, accepting their assignments even if they did so with obvious reluctance. As they filed out of the chamber, Caden remained behind, his hands gripping the edge of the council table, his head bowed with exhaustion and stress. He had just effectively declared war on political tradition, had broken the most advantageous marriage alliance in a generation, had confined his former, intended to her quarters like a prisoner. All for a woman he barely knew, a mate he had just met, a bond that defied logic and practical sense. But even as he questioned his own actions, even as he acknowledged the risks he was taking, Caden knew he would make the same choices again. Because when he had looked into Nora's eyes in that clearing, when he had watched the ancient ones bow to her in recognition, when he had kissed her and felt the mate bond snap into place with undeniable certainty, he had known that everything before that moment had been preparation, had been waiting, had been moving toward this destiny. She was his mate. She was the one the prophecies spoke of, and he would burn the entire world down before he would let anyone take her from him. The night stretched long and restless. Nora could not sleep despite the comfortable bed and warm fire, her mind too full of everything that had happened, her body too wired with nervous energy. She paced the room like a caged animal, moving from window to door to fireplace and back again, wondering what was happening in the council chamber, what accusations Vivian was making, what consequences Caden would face for protecting her. Part of her wished she had never gone on that hunting expedition, had never discovered the truth about the Ancient One's recognition, had never learned that she might be something more than the worthless Omega everyone believed her to be. Ignorance had been painful, yes, but at least it had been safe. Knowledge brought danger, responsibility, expectations she had no idea how to meet. Another part of her, the part where her wolf was slowly awakening, felt relief at finally understanding why she had always felt different, why she had never fit properly into pack hierarchy, why her wolf had remained dormant when everyone else's had emerged in adolescence. She was not broken. She was not defective. She was simply something else entirely, something that operated outside the normal rules of werewolf society. When Caden finally returned, it was well past midnight, the palace quiet with sleep around them. He entered without knocking, using his own key to open the locked door, and Nora saw immediately that the council meeting had not gone well. His expression was grim, his shoulders tight with tension, his eyes shadowed with stress. But when he saw her standing by the window, illuminated by moonlight, something in his face softened, some of the hardness melting away. "You should be sleeping," he said, moving toward her with slow steps, as if giving her time to retreat if she wished. "It has been an exhausting few days." Nora shook her head, her hands twisting together nervously. "I could not sleep. I kept thinking about what might be happening, what trouble I have caused you, what—" But Caden cut her off by pulling her into his arms, wrapping her in his warmth and strength, his chin resting on top of her head. "You have caused me no trouble that I did not choose. For myself," he murmured into her hair. "Every decision I made tonight was mine, made with full knowledge of the consequences. You are not responsible for other people's reactions to truth." Nora let herself relax into his embrace, let herself take comfort from his presence even though she knew she should maintain distance, should protect her heart from the inevitable pain that would come when reality forced them apart. Because surely this could not last. Surely the political pressures would eventually become too great. Surely Caden would have to choose his kingdom over one insignificant girl, no matter what bonds or prophecies suggested otherwise. "What happened?" she asked quietly, her voice muffled against his chest. "What did the council say? What did Vivian do?" Caden was silent for a long moment, his arms tightening around her fractionally. And when he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Vivian made accusations of dark magic and manipulation. The council expressed concerns about political stability and broken alliances. I made it clear that you are under my protection and that investigating your heritage takes priority over political convenience. Vivian did not take the news well. She is currently confined to her quarters until I decide what to do about the formal dissolution of our betrothal." He pulled back slightly so he could see her face, his hands coming up to frame her cheeks. "This is going to get worse before it gets better. You need to understand that. There will be challenges to your position, attempts to discredit you, possibly even direct threats to your safety. Are you prepared for that? Are you strong enough to withstand what is coming?" The question was fair, but terrifying. Nora wanted to say yes, wanted to be brave and confident and ready to face whatever challenges awaited. But she had spent her entire life being the opposite of strong, being the Omega who survived by being invisible and compliant and small. She did not know how to be anything else. did not know how to transform from victim to warrior overnight, just because destiny said she should. "I do not know," she admitted, the honesty painful but necessary. "I do not know if I am strong enough. I do not know if I can be what you need me to be, what the ancient ones seem to think I should be. All I know is that I am tired of being afraid, tired of being worthless, tired of believing that I deserve nothing better than scraps and shadows. If you think I can learn to be strong, if you think I can grow into whatever role destiny has planned for me, then I will try. But I cannot promise I will not fail. I cannot promise I will not disappoint you." The vulnerability in her voice, the raw honesty of her fears, made something fierce and protective surge through Caden. He pulled her close again, his lips brushing against her forehead in a gesture that was tender despite his obvious strength. "You will not fail, because I will not let you fail. We are in this together now, Nora. Your battles are my battles. Your victories are my victories. And I will do everything in my power to help you discover who you truly are beneath all the lies and limitations others have placed on you." They stood like that for long minutes, wrapped in each other's arms, taking comfort from shared warmth and closeness. When Caden finally released her, it was with obvious reluctance. "I should let you rest," he said, moving toward the door. "It will be dawn in a few hours, and we have much to do tomorrow. I have scholars searching the archives for information about your potential bloodline. I have sent messages to the few elders who might remember stories of the first shifters, and I need to begin the delicate process of managing the political fallout from tonight's decisions." He paused with his hand on the door handle, looking back at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "But before I go, I need you to know something. What I feel for you is not obligation or duty or political calculation. The mate bond is real, yes, but beyond that, I find myself drawn to your strength, even when you do not see it yourself, to your kindness despite how cruelly you have been treated, to your courage in facing a future that terrifies you. You are not a burden, Nora. You are a gift. Do not ever doubt that." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with words that wrapped around her heart like armor against the darkness ahead. The next weeks were a whirlwind of activity and tension that kept the entire palace on edge. Caden moved Nora from the guest quarters to a suite in the royal wing, assigning her personal guards and making it clear through his actions, if not his words, that she held a position of significance in his life. The pack members' reactions varied widely. Some, particularly the younger wolves who had no investment in traditional politics, were curious and even supportive, intrigued by the possibility that their king had found his true mate regardless of social status. Others, especially those with connections to Vivian's family or political ambitions tied to the old betrothal, were hostile and resentful, viewing Nora as an interloper who had seduced the king through deception or magic. Nora found herself the subject of constant whispers and stares, her every move watched and judged, her presence in any room enough to halt conversations and create uncomfortable silences. It was the opposite of the invisibility she had relied on for survival, and the exposure left her feeling raw and vulnerable in ways she struggled to manage. Caden insisted she attend pack meetings and formal dinners, positioning her at his side in ways that made his intentions clear, even though he had not made any formal announcement about their mate bond. He was strategic in his approach, allowing the pack to slowly adjust to her presence, to see her interacting with him as an equal rather than a subordinate, to witness the respect and protection he showed her. But the strategy required Nora to perform a role she had no training for, to act with confidence she did not feel, to navigate social situations that would have been challenging for an experienced courtier, much less a former servant. Caden was patient with her mistakes, protective when others were cruel, but Nora could see the strain the situation placed on him, the constant balancing act between his desire to claim her publicly and his need to maintain pack stability. The worst Moments came when she overheard pack members discussing her in terms that ranged from pitying to vicious. She has no training, no education, no understanding of pack politics. How can he possibly think she would make a suitable queen? It is obvious she has manipulated him somehow. No Alpha King would willingly choose a wolfless Omega over Lady Vivian unless magic was involved. Give it time. He will come to his senses once the novelty wears off, once he realizes what he has given up for a pretty face and whatever trick she is playing. The words hurt more than Nora wanted to admit. Struck at insecurities she was already struggling to overcome. Reinforced doubts that kept her awake at night, questioning whether she was truly meant for this life, or simply prolonging inevitable disaster. The scholars Caden had set to researching her bloodline worked tirelessly, poring over ancient texts and fragmented records, but progress was frustratingly slow. The first shifters had existed so long ago that most information about them had been lost to time or deliberately destroyed during the various consolidations of power that had created the modern pack system. What little remained was contradictory and incomplete, more legend than history, impossible to verify or rely upon. One elder, a woman named Grandmother Iris, who claimed to be over 100 years old, told Nora stories of the first queen, a she-wolf of such power that she could command not just wolves but all the creatures of the forest, who could heal with a touch and destroy with a thought, who had loved an Alpha King from a different time and been betrayed by those who feared her strength. They killed her, you see, Iris said, her clouded eyes fixed on something only she could see. Poisoned her during the Great Rite when her defenses were lowered, and her bloodline was hunted down, eliminated, scattered to the winds until everyone believed it extinct. But blood like that cannot be truly destroyed. It waits. It sleeps. It emerges when the need is greatest. The old woman reached out to touch Nora's face with gnarled fingers. You have her eyes, child. The same violet undertone that marked the royal line. The same power waiting to bloom. But be careful. Those who feared her will fear you too. History has a way of repeating itself. The warning haunted Nora, especially as she began to notice subtle attempts to undermine her position. Her food was occasionally tampered with. Nothing lethal but enough to make her sick and weak. Her quarters were searched when she was away. Personal items moved or taken. Whispered rumors spread through the pack suggesting she practiced dark magic, that she had cursed Caden, that she consorted with demons in the forest. The attacks were never direct enough to prove who was behind them, never obvious enough to justify major retaliation, but they wore at Nora's confidence and sense of safety. She tried to handle it herself at first, not wanting to burden Caden with problems she thought she should be able to solve, not wanting to appear weak or incapable. But one night, after drinking tea that had been poisoned with enough wolfsbane to have killed a normal wolf but only made her violently ill thanks to whatever protections her hidden bloodline provided, she finally broke down and told Caden everything. His rage was incandescent, his control slipping enough that his eyes remained gold for hours after she finished explaining. His wolf so close to the guillot surface that the air around him practically vibrated with power. "Who brought you the tea?" he demanded, his voice rough with barely suppressed violence. "Who had access to your quarters? Give me names, Nora. I will deal with this permanently." But Nora shook her head, still weak from the poison, her stomach cramping painfully. It could be anyone. The servants rotate, the guards change shifts. People come and go constantly. Making examples of suspected conspirators will just create martyrs and increase resentment. We need a different approach. She reached out to take his hand, trying to ground him, trying to pull him back from the edge of losing control. What I need is not more guards or harsher punishments. What I need is to prove I am worth protecting. What I need is to find my wolf, to access the power everyone keeps saying I should have, to become someone who can defend herself, rather than relying on you to fight all my battles. The logic was sound, and Caden could not argue against it, even though every instinct screamed at him to lock her away somewhere safe and eliminate every threat personally. But she was right. As long as Nora remained perceived as weak and powerless, as long as she depended entirely on his protection, the attempts to harm her would continue. She needed to awaken her wolf, needed to access her heritage, needed to become the queen the ancient ones recognized her as, rather than the victim her enemies believed her to be. "Then we call them," Caden D. said after a long moment, his decision made. "We go back to the forest where they first appeared. We let them guide you toward your wolf. It is the full moon in 3 days. That is the traditional time for first transformations, when the moon goddess's power is strongest. If your wolf is going to awaken, that is when it will happen." The plan was both terrifying and thrilling. Nora had given up hoping for her wolf years ago, had accepted that she would remain forever trapped in her human form, while everyone around her could transform at will. The possibility that she might finally experience what she had been denied her entire life made her heart race with equal parts anticipation and fear. But there was also the practical concern of leaving the palace's relative safety to venture into the forest, of making herself vulnerable in pursuit of power that might not even exist. "What about the pack?" Nora asked. "What about Vivian? She is still confined. But if we leave the palace?" "Unguarded. If you are away during the full moon..." Caden cut her off with a gesture. "Marcus will hold the palace. I will bring a small group of my most trusted warriors. And Vivian will remain exactly where she is until I decide she no longer poses a threat to you. The pack can survive 3 days without my constant presence. Your transformation cannot wait any longer." The conviction in his voice steadied Nora's nerves, reminding her that she was not facing this alone, that Caden had committed himself fully to helping her discover her power and claim her place. That night, curled against his side in the bed they had begun sharing despite the impropriety, Nora allowed herself to hope that maybe she could become what everyone seemed to need her to be. Maybe the scared Omega could transform into a queen. Maybe the powerless girl could learn to wield the strength the ancient ones recognized in her. Maybe destiny was not just a cruel joke, but an actual path forward, difficult and dangerous, but ultimately leading somewhere better than where she had been. Caden's arms tightened around her as if he could sense her thoughts, his lips brushing against her temple in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "Sleep," he murmured. "You will need your strength for what is coming. But know this, Nora. Whatever happens in that forest, whatever your wolf turns out to be, you are already everything I need. The power is just confirmation of what I already know. You are my mate. You are my queen. And no force in this world or any other will take you from me." The promise settled over her like a blanket, warm and heavy, and for the first time in weeks, Nora slept without nightmares, without fear, without doubt eating away at her fragile confidence. The journey back to the forest where the ancient ones had first appeared took 2 days of hard travel. Caden brought only his most loyal warriors, wolves he had fought beside in the territorial wars, whose devotion was to him personally, rather than to political factions or social hierarchies. Marcus came, of course, his initial skepticism about Nora having gradually transformed into grudging respect as he witnessed her resilience under pressure. Thomas, the grizzled scout, came as well, his experience with the wild lands making him invaluable. 5 others rounded out the party, all of them seasoned fighters who could be trusted to protect Nora if danger emerged. They traveled light and fast, avoiding Maine, roads and populated areas, not wanting to draw attention to their destination or purpose. When they finally reached the clearing where everything had changed weeks before, Nora felt a rush of recognition and power that made her stumble, Caden's quick reflexes catching her before she fell. The place was charged with energy, humming with ancient magic that she could actually feel now rather than just sensing vaguely. Her skin prickled with awareness, her heart rate accelerating, something deep, inside her chest, stirring and stretching like a creature waking from hibernation. "They are already here," Thomas said quietly, his eyes scanning the tree line. "I can sense them watching, waiting." And indeed, as Nora focused her attention outward, she could feel the Ancient One's presence surrounding the clearing, their consciousness brushing against hers in welcome and recognition. The gray wolf who had first approached her stepped into view, its massive form materializing from the shadows as if it had been invisible until it chose to be seen. Behind it, the rest of the pack emerged, 30 or 40 wild wolves moving with silent grace, their attention fixed on Nora with an intensity that should have been frightening, but instead felt like coming home. Caden released her carefully, stepping back to give her space while remaining close enough to intervene if needed. "Go to them," he said softly. "They are yours. They have always been yours. Let them show you what you are meant to become." Nora took a shaky breath and walked forward, her steps uncertain at first but growing more confident as she moved toward the gray wolf. When she reached it, she sank to her knees, her hands coming up to bury themselves in the thick fur of its neck, her forehead pressing against its massive head in a gesture of connection and supplication. The wolf rumbled deep in its chest, a sound that was part growl and part purr, its tongue rasping across her cheek in affection. Then it pulled back and looked at her with eyes that were far too intelligent, far too knowing, and Nora heard its voice in her mind as clearly as if it had spoken aloud. "Little sister, lost daughter, it is time to wake. It is time to claim what was stolen. It is time to remember who you were born to be." The voice was ancient and wild, carrying weight and power that made Nora's entire body tremble. Before she could respond, before she could question or doubt, the gray wolf threw its head back and howled, a sound that echoed through the forest and seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. The other Ancient Ones joined in, their voices creating a chorus that was beautiful and terrible and completely overwhelming. And somewhere inside Nora, buried beneath years of suppression and denial and imposed weakness, her wolf answered. The pain was excruciating, like her entire body was being torn apart and rebuilt simultaneously. Nora screamed, unable to contain the agony, her back arching as her bones began to shift and reform. But along with the pain came power, flooding through her in waves that burned away every limitation, every lie she had been told about her worthlessness, every doubt about her place in the world. She was not weak. She had never been weak. She was a storm that had been forced into stillness, a wildfire that had been dampened into embers. And now, finally, gloriously, she was burning free. The transformation was unlike anything the watching warriors had ever witnessed. Where? Normal shifts were quick and practiced. Nora's was slow and dramatic, accompanied by visible waves of power that rippled outward from her body in concentric circles. Her form elongated and changed, her clothes shredding as her body grew and altered, her human shape giving way to something that was both wolf and more than wolf. When the transformation finally completed, the clearing fell into stunned silence. Nora's wolf was massive, larger even than Caden's king form, her fur a stunning combination of silver and deep violet that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. Her eyes, when she opened them, were the same violet with gold flecks that Grandmother Iris had called the mark of the royal line, glowing with power that was impossible to deny or dismiss. She was magnificent. She was terrifying. She was everything the prophecies had promised and more. The Ancient Ones bowed as one, their massive bodies lowering to the ground in submission and reverence, acknowledging their queen's emergence. And Nora, for the first time in her life, felt complete, felt whole, felt like she finally understood what she was meant to be. Caden approached slowly, his own wolf responding to hers with recognition and desire, and bone-deep certainty. When he was close enough to touch, he shifted as well, his black wolf form impressive, but noticeably smaller than her transformed state. They circled each other, assessing, acknowledging, the mate bond between them blazing bright enough that even the watching warriors could sense it, could feel the rightness of their connection. Then Nora's wolf lowered her head, nuzzling against Caden's neck, and he returned the gesture, their bodies pressing together in a display of affection and unity that made it clear to anyone watching that they were bound, matched, destined to rule together. The Ancient One's howls of approval echoed through the forest, celebrating the awakening of their queen and the recognition of their king. Marcus, watching from the edge of the clearing, shook his head in wonder and dropped to one knee, the traditional gesture of fealty to royalty. "I was wrong," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the moment of relative quiet between howls. "I doubted. I questioned. But I see now. She is exactly what we needed. She is exactly what you needed. And I swear my loyalty to her, as I have sworn it to you, my king." The other warriors followed his lead, kneeling in acknowledgement, accepting what could no longer be denied. Nora was not the powerless Omega they had believed her to be. She was the first queen reborn, the lost bloodline restored, the one who would change everything about how the packs understood power and destiny, and the true meaning of strength. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who loves epic romance. Tell me in the comments, did you see this ending coming? The transformation had awakened more than just Nora's wolf. It had awakened memories that were not hers. Knowledge passed down through blood and bone from ancestors who had walked the earth when the world was young and wild. She understood now why her wolf had never emerged in adolescence like everyone else's. The power in her bloodline was too great, too dangerous, to be accessed before she was ready, before she had the emotional strength and life experience to wield it without destroying herself or others. She understood why the Ancient Ones had recognized her, why they had protected her despite having no reason to care about the struggles of modern packs. She was their legacy, their continuation, the proof that the old ways and old power still existed beneath the veneer of civilization and politics. And most importantly, she understood why Caden had been drawn to her so powerfully, why the mate bond had formed despite the impossibility of their match. They were not randomly paired by the moon goddess. They were specifically crafted for each other. The king of the present bound to the queen of the past and future. Their union meant to bridge the gap between modern pack politics and ancient power, creating a new era for all werewolves. When Nora finally shifted back to human form, Caden was there with a cloak to wrap around her nakedness, his hands gentle as he helped her stand on legs that felt unfamiliar after her first transformation. She was exhausted, drained by the massive expenditure of power, but also exhilarated in a way she had never experienced. She had a wolf. She had power. She had a place in the world that no one could take from her or deny. "How do you feel?" Caden asked, his eyes searching her face with concern and pride in equal measure. Nora laughed, the sound coming out shaky but genuine. "I feel like I could take on the entire world. I feel like I have finally found pieces of myself I did not know were missing. I feel..." She paused, trying to find words adequate to express the transformation that went so far beyond the physical. "I feel like I know who I am supposed to be now, and I am ready to become her, whatever that takes, whatever that costs." Caden pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest, his relief and joy palpable. "You already are her. You have always been her. You just needed to remember." His lips found hers in a kiss that was both celebration and promise, sealing their bond not just as mates, but as partners who would face the future together, as equals, as the king and queen the werewolf world did not yet know it needed. The return to the palace was triumphant, rather than secretive. Caden made no attempt to hide Nora's transformation, allowed the Ancient Ones to escort them for the first part of their journey, making sure that word of what had occurred spread quickly through the territories. By the time they reached the palace gates, the entire pack had assembled to witness their arrival, faces showing everything from awe to fear to resentment to hope. Nora rode beside Caden rather than behind him, her head held high, her violet and silver fur still visible in streaks through her human appearance, marking her as something other, something special, something powerful. When they dismounted, Caden took her hand publicly, the gesture deliberate and significant, claiming her before the entire pack as his mate and future queen. "This is Nora," he announced, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd with absolute authority. "She is my true mate, chosen by the moon goddess and confirmed by the ancient ones. She carries the bloodline of the first shifters, the royal line we believed extinct. She is my queen. She will stand at my side as we lead the 5 kingdoms into a new era. Anyone who cannot accept this, anyone who wishes to challenge her claim or question her power, may step forward now and face me directly." The challenge hung in the air, dangerous and unmistakable. No one moved, no one spoke. Even those who harbored doubts or resentments were not foolish enough to openly defy their alpha king, especially not when he stood beside a mate who clearly possessed power that rivaled or exceeded his own. After a long moment of silence, Marcus stepped forward, dropping to one knee in the formal gesture of fealty. "Hail to the Alpha King. Hail to the first Queen reborn. May your reign bring prosperity and strength to all the packs." It was the traditional greeting for a new monarch, and its use in this context made Caden's intentions crystal clear. This was not a temporary situation. This was not a phase he would outgrow. This was the new reality that the pack would have to accept. One by one, the assembled wolves followed Marcus's lead, kneeling in acknowledgement, offering their respect, if not yet their full acceptance. It was a beginning, imperfect and incomplete, but it was enough. Nora felt tears pricking at her eyes as she looked out over the kneeling pack, remembering all the times she had been the one kneeling, the one dismissed and ignored, the one who existed only on the now edges of pack life. The reversal was almost too much to process, too overwhelming to fully believe. But Caden's hand in hers was solid and real, anchoring her to the moment, reminding her that she was not dreaming, that this was truly happening, that she had finally claimed her birthright and her destiny. The formal ceremony to dissolve Caden's betrothal to Vivian and announce his intention to marry Nora took place 3 days later, conducted before the full council and representatives from all 5 kingdoms. Vivian attended in a dress of pure white, her face a careful mask of resigned dignity, playing the role of gracious victim to perfection. But Nora caught the flash of pure hatred in her eyes when no one else was looking, saw the promise of future vengeance that Vivian kept hidden beneath polite words and forced smiles. The threat did not terrify Nora the way it once would have. She had her wolf now. She had power. And most importantly, she had begun to understand that strength was not just about physical power or supernatural abilities. It was about knowing your worth, claiming your space, refusing to let others define your value or potential. Vivian could plot and scheme all she wanted. Nora would be ready. When it came time for Nora to speak during the ceremony, to accept the position of Alpha Queen and make her formal vows to the pack, she did so with a voice that carried clearly through the great hall, with confidence that came not from arrogance but from hard-won self-knowledge. "I am not the queen you expected. I do not come from noble bloodlines you recognize. I have not been trained in politics or courtly graces, but I carry power that predates your modern hierarchies, wisdom passed down through blood from the first shifters who walked these lands before packs existed. I will make mistakes. I will stumble as I learn, but I promise you this. I will fight for this pack with everything I am. I will protect those who cannot protect themselves. I will ensure that no one else experiences the powerlessness and dismissal I endured for so many years, and I will stand beside your king as a true partner, not a trophy or a political pawn, but as an equal who brings her own strength to our united rule. The The speech was not flowery or traditionally elegant, but it was honest and heartfelt. And Nora saw understanding dawn in many faces as the pack members began to realize that their new queen was not trying to be someone she was not attempting to fit into a mold she had not been shaped for. She was offering them something different, something authentic, something that might actually be better than what they had expected, even if it was unfamiliar. Caden stood beside her throughout, his pride evident in every line of his body, his hand resting on the small of her back, in a gesture of support and solidarity. When the formal vows were complete, when the council had officially recognized their union, he turned to her and cupped her face in his hands, kissing her before the entire assembled crowd, with a passion and tenderness that left no doubt about the depth of his feelings. "My mate," he murmured against her lips, the words both celebration and benediction. "My queen, my equal, my everything." And Nora, who had spent so much of her life believing she was worth nothing, who had endured years of dismissal and degradation, who had survived on scraps of kindness and moments of dignity stolen from the edges of pack life, finally allowed herself to believe that she deserved this, that she had earned this, that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly who she was meant to be with, living a destiny she had never dared to dream possible. The months that followed were not easy. The Western territories did express outrage over the broken betrothal, though their anger was somewhat mollified by generous trade concessions and political agreements that protected their interests. Some of the older, more traditional packs continued to grumble about accepting a queen with no recognizable noble heritage, though their complaints grew quieter as Nora demonstrated her power and her willingness to engage with pack politics in good faith. Vivian eventually left the palace, returning to her family's territory with promises of forgiveness and reconciliation that Nora did not quite believe but accepted as part of moving forward. The real work of transformation happened gradually, in small moments, and incremental changes rather than dramatic gestures. Nora implemented policies to protect lower-ranking pack members, creating pathways for wolves without powerful connections to advance based on merit rather than bloodline. She invited the Ancient Ones to participate in major pack decisions, bridging the gap between wild wolves and civilized society in ways that enriched both groups. She trained with Caden and the warriors, developing her fighting skills and learning to wield her considerable power with precision rather than overwhelming force. She studied with the scholars, learning pack history and politics, filling in the gaps in her education with voracious dedication. She made mistakes, yes, but she learned from them, grew stronger with each challenge faced, an obstacle overcome. And through it all, Caden was beside her, supporting her, believing in her, loving her with a constancy that never wavered even when circumstances tested them both. On the night of their official mating ceremony, conducted under the full moon with the Ancient Ones, howling their approval from the forest beyond the palace walls, Nora stood beside Caden and looked out over the assembled packs, seeing acceptance where there had been doubt, respect where there had been dismissal, hope where there had been resistance. She was not the same terrified Omega who had huddled by a campfire expecting to die in the wilderness. She was the Alpha Queen, the first blood reborn, the bridge between ancient power and modern civilization, the proof that destiny could not be denied, and that sometimes the most powerful wolves were the ones no one expected to matter. When Caden drew her close for the final ritual of their bonding, when he marked her as his mate before the moon goddess and all the witnesses, Nora felt the circle complete, felt the prophecy fulfilled, felt the future stretch out before them bright with possibility and promise. There would be challenges ahead. There would be threats and obstacles and moments of doubt. But she would face them all with her mate at her side, with her power fully awakened, with the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, exactly who she was meant to be. The hungry wolves had surrounded the camp to protect her, and in doing so, they had revealed the truth she had needed her entire life. She was not worthless. She was not powerless. She was not meant to remain in shadows, accepting scraps and surviving on the edges. She was meant to stand in the light, to lead, to transform not just her own life, but the lives of all those who had been dismissed and diminished by systems that valued bloodlines over character, connections over competence, tradition over truth. And as she kissed her mate under the full moon, surrounded by wolves both wild and tamed, Nora finally understood that sometimes the greatest power came not from being what others expected, but from becoming everything they never imagined you could be.